Picture this, a bride standing at the altar, surrounded by white roses and crystal chandeliers, her designer gown shimmering under golden lights. Everything is perfect. The guests are mesmerized. The photographer is capturing every angle. And then, the doors at the back of the venue swing open. An elderly woman walks in, her clothes worn and faded, her hands trembling as she clutches a small fabric bundle to her chest. The bride's smile vanishes. Her eyes narrow. She leans toward her maid of honor and whispers something sharp, something cold. The old woman keeps walking, her eyes filled with tears, her lips moving as if she's praying. And then, in front of 300 people, the bride does something unforgivable. She looks at this woman, this stranger to everyone else, and says the words that will haunt her for the rest of her life. But what no one knew, what no one could have possibly known, was that beneath that woman's wig was a secret so devastating, so heartbreaking, that when she finally removed it, the entire room fell silent. Some gasped, some wept, and the bride, she collapsed to her knees. This is the story of Rebecca Morgan, a 28-year-old marketing executive from Charleston, South Carolina, who spent years climbing her way out of poverty and into the arms of a man who could give her the life she always dreamed of. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Rebecca wasn't born into wealth. She grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of town, where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud. Her mother, Ellen, worked as a seamstress, stitching wedding gowns and prom dresses for women who would never know her name. Ellen never complained. She hummed while she worked, her fingers moving quickly over delicate fabrics, her eyes tired but kind. Rebecca remembers watching her mother so late into the night, the glow of the single lamp casting shadows across the room. Ellen would smile at her and say, "One day, baby girl, you're going to have everything I couldn't give you. But don't ever forget where you came from." Rebecca nodded, but even then, a part of her wanted to forget. She wanted to erase the memory of second-hand clothes and free lunch tickets. She wanted to be someone else. Someone better. Someone worthy of respect. By the time Rebecca turned 18, she had a plan. She would go to college, get a degree, find a high-paying job, and marry someone successful. She would build a life so far removed from her childhood that no one would ever guess where she started. And for the most part, her plan worked. She graduated with honors, landed a job at a prestigious firm, and 3 years later, she met Connor Hayes. Connor was everything Rebecca had imagined. He was handsome, confident, and came from a family that owned half the real estate in downtown Charleston. His mother, Patricia Hayes, was a socialite who hosted charity galas and sat on the boards of several nonprofits. His father was a retired judge. When Connor proposed to Rebecca on a yacht during sunset, she said yes before he even finished asking. It was everything she had ever wanted. But there was one problem. Connor's family didn't know the truth about Rebecca's past. She had carefully constructed a version of herself that fit their world. She told them her parents had passed away years ago. She said she grew up in a modest but comfortable home. She never mentioned the apartment or the late-night sewing or the government assistance. And she certainly never mentioned Ellen. Ellen, who was still alive. Ellen, who still lived in that same apartment. Ellen, who called Rebecca every week, her voice soft and hopeful, asking when she could see her daughter again. Rebecca always had an excuse. She was busy with work. She was traveling. She was planning the wedding. The truth was, Rebecca was ashamed. She loved her mother, but she couldn't bear the thought of Connor's family meeting her. She imagined Patricia's polite smile masking judgment. She imagined the whispers at the country club. So, 2 months before the wedding, Rebecca made a decision. She sent her mother a text message. It was short, clinical, almost cruel. "Mom, I think it's best if you don't come to the wedding. Connor's family is very traditional, and it would be complicated. I'll visit you after the honeymoon. I love you." She hit send and tried not to think about it. What Rebecca didn't know was that Ellen never saw that message. Her phone had stopped working weeks earlier, the screen cracked and unresponsive after she dropped it on the sidewalk. Ellen couldn't afford to replace it, so she simply went without. She had no idea her daughter didn't want her at the wedding. She had no idea she was being asked to stay away. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The wedding was held at the Magnolia Estate, a historic venue surrounded by sprawling gardens and oak trees draped in Spanish moss. It was the kind of place that appeared in bridal magazines and cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. Rebecca had spent a year planning every detail. The flowers were imported from Holland. The cake was 6 tiers of vanilla bean and champagne buttercream. The dress, custom-made by a designer in New York, cost more than Ellen's annual income. On the morning of the wedding, Rebecca stood in front of a full-length mirror, her hair swept into an elegant updo, her makeup flawless. She looked like royalty. She felt like she had finally arrived. Connor knocked on the door and peeked inside. "You look incredible," he said, his eyes bright with emotion. Rebecca smiled, but there was a tightness in her chest, a nagging feeling she couldn't quite name. She pushed it away. This was her day. Nothing was going to ruin it. Meanwhile, across town, Ellen sat at her small kitchen table, carefully folding a piece of white lace. It was a veil, one she had been working on for months, stitching delicate patterns into the fabric by hand. She had started making it the day Rebecca got engaged, pouring all her love and hope into every thread. Ellen didn't have much, but she had this. She planned to give it to her daughter as a surprise, a gift that represented everything she couldn't say out loud. That morning, Ellen put on her best dress. It was old, faded at the seams, but she had washed and pressed it carefully. She wrapped the veil in tissue paper, placed it in a cloth bag, and stepped outside. The sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain. Ellen didn't have a car, so she took the bus across town, transferring twice before arriving at the Magnolia Estate. She walked up the long driveway, her shoes pinching her feet, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She wasn't sure if Rebecca knew she was coming, but it didn't matter. She had to be there. She had to see her daughter get married. When Ellen reached the entrance, a young woman in a crisp black suit stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you have an invitation?" Ellen blinked, confused. "I'm the bride's mother," she said softly. The woman glanced at a clipboard, then back at Ellen, her expression skeptical. "I don't see your name on the list. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Ellen's hands tightened around the cloth bag. "Yes, I'm Rebecca Morgan's mother. Please, I just want to see my daughter." The woman hesitated, then nodded toward the doors. "Wait here. I'll check with the wedding planner." Ellen stood in the foyer, her heart pounding. She could hear music drifting from inside, the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses. She felt small, out of place, like she had stepped into a world that wasn't meant for her. A few guests passed by, their eyes sweeping over her worn dress and scuffed shoes. One woman whispered to her companion, and they both laughed softly. Ellen looked down, her cheeks burning with shame. Inside the main hall, Rebecca was standing near the altar, chatting with her bridesmaids. The ceremony was about to begin. The photographer was adjusting his camera. The violinist was tuning her instrument. Everything was on schedule. And then, someone tapped Rebecca on the shoulder. It was Tina, her maid of honor. Becca. There's an old woman at the entrance. She says she's your mom." Rebecca's blood turned cold. She turned slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. "What?" Tina lowered her voice. "She looks I don't know. Not like someone who'd be invited here. Security is asking what to do." Rebecca felt the walls closing in. She glanced at Connor, who was standing near his parents, laughing at something his father said. She imagined Patricia's face if she found out the truth. She imagined the judgment, the questions, the slow unraveling of everything she had built. Without thinking, Rebecca made a decision. "Tell security to handle it," she whispered. "Tell her she can't come in." Tina blinked. "Seriously?" Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Yes. Just handle it." But before Tina could leave, the doors at the back of the hall swung open. Ellen walked in, her small frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Ellen's eyes searched the crowd until they landed on Rebecca, and her face lit up with a trembling smile. She began walking down the aisle, her steps slow and unsteady, clutching the cloth bag to her chest. Rebecca's face drained of color. She felt Connor's eyes on her, felt the weight of 300 people watching. Panic surged through her. Ellen reached the front of the room, her eyes glistening with tears. "Rebecca," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I made this for you. I wanted to give it to you on your special day." She held out the bag, her hands shaking. Rebecca didn't move. She stared at her mother, at the lines on her face, the worn fabric of her dress, the wig that covered her head. And in that moment, all she felt was anger. Anger that Ellen had come. Anger that she had ignored the message she never received. Anger that she was ruining everything. Rebecca's voice came out cold, sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "What are you doing here?" Ellen flinched. I wanted to see you get married. I brought you a gift." Rebecca glanced at Connor, then back at her mother. Her voice rose, echoing across the hall. "You're embarrassing me. I told you not to come. Why couldn't you just listen?" The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Ellen's smile faded. Her hands dropped to her sides. The guests began to whisper, their voices rising like a wave. Connor stepped forward, his expression confused. "Rebecca, what's going on? Who is this?" Rebecca opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, Ellen reached up and slowly removed her wig. Underneath, her scalp was bare, crisscrossed with thick, jagged scars that ran from her forehead to the back of her neck. The scars were old, pale against her skin, but unmistakable. The room gasped. Someone cried out. Rebecca froze, her breath caught in her throat. Ellen looked at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I got these scars saving you," she said quietly. "You were 6 years old. There was a fire in our building. I ran back inside to get you. I carried you out while the ceiling collapsed. I lost my hair. I lost my health. But I saved you, and I would do it again 1,000 times." Rebecca's legs buckled. She reached out for the altar to steady herself, her mind spinning. She remembered the fire. She remembered the smoke, the heat, the terror. She remembered waking up in a hospital bed with her mother sitting beside her, bandages wrapped around her head and arms. But she had been so young. She didn't understand the full weight of what her mother had sacrificed. Over the years, as Rebecca grew older and her mother started wearing wigs, she simply accepted it as part of who Ellen was. She never asked about the scars. She never asked about the pain. She had been too focused on her own life, her own dreams, to look back. And now, standing in front of everyone she had tried to impress, Rebecca saw the truth. Her mother had given up everything for her. Her health, her beauty, her future, and Rebecca had repaid her with shame. Connor stepped forward, his face pale. "Rebecca, is this true? Is she really your mother?" Rebecca couldn't speak. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Connor looked at Ellen, then back at Rebecca. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "I was scared. I didn't want you to see where I came from. I didn't want your family to think less of me." Connor's jaw tightened. He looked at Ellen, who was standing quietly, her hands folded in front of her. He walked over to her and gently took the cloth bag from her hands. "May I?" he asked. Ellen nodded. Connor opened the bag and pulled out the veil. It was simple, delicate, stitched with small white flowers along the edges. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He turned to Rebecca, holding the veil out to her. "Your mother made this for you," he said quietly. "She walked across town in the rain. She came here because she loves you, and you threw her away." His words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She sank to her knees, her designer gown pooling around her. "Mom," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." But Ellen didn't move. She stood there, her face pale, her breathing shallow. And then, slowly, she swayed. Connor reached out just in time to catch her as she collapsed. "Someone call an ambulance," he shouted. The guests erupted into chaos. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking as she reached for her mother. "Mom! Mom, please!" Ellen's eyes fluttered open for a moment. She looked at Rebecca, and despite everything, she smiled. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I always was." And then her eyes closed. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They lifted Ellen onto a stretcher and rushed her out of the hall. Rebecca followed, her gown dragging across the floor, her makeup smeared with tears. Connor stood in the doorway, watching her go, the veil still clutched in his hands. Patricia Hayes approached him, her face tight with disapproval. "Connor, what on earth is happening?" Connor didn't answer. He looked down at the veil, at the careful stitches, at the love woven into every thread. And for the first time, he saw Rebecca clearly. Not the polished, perfect woman she pretended to be, but the frightened girl who had spent so long running from her past that she forgot who she was. Rebecca sat in the sterile waiting room of Charleston General Hospital, still wearing her wedding gown. The fabric was stained with mud and tears. Her hair had fallen loose from its updo. She didn't care. She sat with her hands pressed together, staring at the double doors that led to the emergency room. Connor arrived an hour later, carrying a change of clothes. He sat beside her without a word, the veil folded carefully in his lap. They waited in silence. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression grave. "Are you Ellen Morgan's family?" Rebecca shot to her feet. "Yes. I'm her daughter. Is she okay?" The doctor hesitated. "Your mother suffered a severe cardiac event. We did everything we could, but her heart was already weak. The stress was too much. I'm very sorry. She didn't make it." Rebecca's world tilted. She heard the words, but they didn't make sense. She shook her head, stumbling backward. No, that's not possible. She was fine. She was just talking to me." Connor caught her before she fell. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry." Rebecca collapsed against him, a raw, guttural scream tearing from her throat. "I killed her. Oh God, I killed her." The days that followed were a blur. Rebecca moved through them like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. Connor stayed by her side, but she could feel the distance between them. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. On the day of Ellen's funeral, Rebecca stood beside a simple casket in a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. There were only a handful of people there. Neighbors who remembered Ellen's kindness. A few women from the sewing shop where she used to work. Connor stood beside Rebecca, holding her hand. Patricia and the rest of the Hayes family were notably absent. The pastor spoke about forgiveness and grace, but Rebecca didn't hear him. She stared at the casket, at the spray of white lilies on top, and thought about all the things she would never get to say. "I'm sorry. I love you. Thank you for saving my life." When it was over, Rebecca placed the veil on top of the casket. It was the only thing she could give her mother now. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Rebecca whispered, "I'll make this right, Mom. I promise." 3 weeks later, Rebecca sat in Connor's living room. They hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Connor had been patient, but she could sense the questions he wasn't asking. Finally, he sat down across from her. "We need to talk," he said gently. Rebecca nodded, her hands folded in her lap. Connor took a deep breath. I loved you, Rebecca. I still do. But I don't know if I can marry someone who's ashamed of where they come from. Someone who values appearances more than the people who love them. Rebecca's throat tightened. I know. And I don't blame you. Connor looked down at his hands. I think we need time. Time to figure out if this is something we can move past. Rebecca nodded again, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand. A week later, Connor called off the wedding. Rebecca moved out of his apartment and back into her mother's old place. It was the same cramped two-bedroom she had grown up in. The walls were still thin. The neighbors were still loud. But for the first time in years, Rebecca didn't feel ashamed. She felt like she was home. Over the next 6 months, Rebecca made changes. She quit her high-pressure job and took a position at a non-profit that provided career training for low-income women. She started volunteering at a community center, teaching young girls basic sewing skills, using her mother's old machine. She learned the names of her neighbors. She attended church on Sundays. She stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. One afternoon, Rebecca was at the community center when a teenage girl approached her. Miss Rebecca, can you help me fix this? The girl held up a torn dress. Rebecca smiled and nodded. Of course. Sit down and I'll show you. As she guided the girl's hands over the fabric, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt a sense of peace. A sense of purpose. She wasn't the girl who climbed her way out of poverty anymore. She was the woman who chose to climb back down and lift others up. One evening, as Rebecca was locking up the community center, she found a small envelope tucked under the door. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Rebecca, I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of the guests at your wedding. I saw what happened. I saw your mother. And I saw you break. I just wanted to tell you that I've been following your work at the center, and I'm amazed by the woman you've become. Your mother would be so proud. Keep going. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Rebecca read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. That night, she went home and opened the drawer where she kept her mother's things. The veil was there, carefully folded, still smelling faintly of lavender. Rebecca held it to her chest and whispered, I hope I'm making you proud, Mom. I'm trying. I'm really trying. Sometimes, the people we're most ashamed of are the ones who loved us the most. Sometimes, the life we're running toward isn't worth the people we leave behind. Rebecca learned that lesson the hard way. She lost her mother. She lost the man she thought she loved. But in the process, she found something more valuable. She found herself. Today, Rebecca still lives in her mother's apartment. She still teaches at the community center. And every night before she goes to bed, she looks at the veil hanging on her wall and remembers the woman who sacrificed everything so she could have a chance at a better life. Rebecca never remarried. But she found a different kind of happiness. The kind that comes from living with integrity. From honoring the people who shaped you. From understanding that your worth isn't measured by what you wear or who you marry, but by how you treat the people who love you when no one else is watching. So here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. Have you ever been ashamed of someone you loved? Have you ever pushed someone away because you were afraid of what others might think? And if you could go back, what would you do differently? Rebecca's story is a painful reminder that pride can cost us everything. That the people we take for granted are often the ones who would give us the world. That sometimes, by the time we realize what we've lost, it's too late to get it back. If there's someone in your life you've been avoiding, someone you've been ashamed of, maybe it's time to pick up the phone. Maybe it's time to say the words you've been holding back. Because tomorrow isn't promised. And the people who love us deserve better than our pride. What would you have done if you were in Rebecca's shoes? Would you have had the courage to introduce your mother, no matter what anyone thought? Or would you have made the same mistake? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own life and the people you love, do us a favor. Share it. Subscribe so you never miss our next story. Because every story we tell is a reminder that life is short, love is precious, and the only thing that truly matters in the end is how we treat the people who matter most. Thank you for watching. And remember, the richest people aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the most love. Don't wait until it's too late to realize that.